My name is Megan Duquette. I'm California ReLeaf's Educational and Communications Program Manager. And we're so happy that you could be here today and join us for our educational webinar about the economic impact of urban and community forestry in California. So on behalf of all of us here at California ReLeaf, thank you for being here today. I wanted to provide a little bit of background about California ReLeaf for those of you that might not be familiar with our organization. We are a statewide nonprofit, and we are based in Sacramento, California. And our mission is to support grassroots efforts and build strategic partnerships that protect, enhance, and grow California's urban and community forests. And we have four main program areas to help us fulfill our mission. We have the ReLeaf Network, which is we are the umbrella organization for over 85 urban and community forest nonprofits and community-based organizations. And California ReLeaf hosts educational peer-to-peer learning opportunities for the network throughout the year. And we highly encourage you to go check out our website to learn more about our network and our network members. We're doing great work across California. We provide pass-through grants with private and public funding, and we currently have 2 small grant programs open. And so if you're interested in grant programs for community-based organizations, check that out on our website as well. We do advocacy at the state level. We speak for trees in state legislation and policy, and we provide resources for community-based organizations to speak for trees in their neighborhood. And last but not least, we host educational webinars like the webinars we're hosting today. We provide information about research and resources to groups across California to help keep our urban forests healthy. And like I said, we invite you to learn more about our organization by visiting our website, californiareleaf.org. And we highly encourage you to join our email list to stay up to date about upcoming webinars, as well as find us on social media. We post a lot there too. So now that you know a little bit about organization, I wanted to go over some housekeeping items for today's webinar. The first of which is today's webinar will be recorded, and we will be emailing the recording link to all of the registrants today via email, probably sometime later this week. I also wanted to let you know our webinar is 1.5 hours today. The presentation portion will be about 1 hour in length, and the remaining time will be dedicated to a question and answer period that we'll have at the end, which means we ask that you would use our chat feature to ask your questions, or if you'd rather ask them verbally, there'll be an opportunity for you to say those questions out loud. We ask that you use the raise your hand feature on Zoom. And if you're not quite sure where to find that button, on the bottom of the toolbar, there is a reaction button. And if you click that, the raise your hand button will appear. You can select that. We will call on you, and then you can ask your questions verbally. So with that, I am now going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Cindy Blaine. She's going to provide a little bit about information about the background of the research study today and introduce our presenters. So with that, Cindy, you now have the floor.
Cool. Thank you very much, Megan. Hi, y'all, and thank you all for being here today to learn about the results of the California Urban Forest Economic Impact Research Study. As you may know, there have been 2 other urban forest economic impact studies in the past done for California, and these have all been funded by CAL FIRE, by the way. CAL FIRE's Urban Forestry Department, starting with the first one in the 1990s and then another one in 2009. So this one is actually based on the fact that we were trying to do a 10-year study follow-up. We did, of course, have COVID, which was a little bit of a hindrance. But this research is key to understanding the economic trends in the urban forest investments as well as jobs. So we're really pleased that you're here. And I thank you if you participated and filled out the questionnaires. That was a really that's not easy to get people to fill out questionnaires. So in addition to providing more complete picture over time for California's economic trends, this study complements 2 other recent urban forest economic studies, also done by our researchers, Dr. Rajan Parajuli of North Carolina State and Dr. Eric Wiseman. The U.S. Forest Service Southern Region, which is 13 states, was completed using this methodology, and so was the U.S. Forest Service Northeast/Midwest region, which is 21 states, again by Dr. Rajan Parajuli. So we felt that this was a really great way to try and have exactly the same methodology, working for as much of the U.S. as we could get. There's another portion in the middle that we haven't gotten yet, but I expect Rajan will find a way. So again, this provides the U.S. Forest Service with a consistent data approach to analyzing the total economic impact across a major portion of the U.S. And let me lastly again say thank you so much to Rajan and to Eric Wiseman, as well as to Brittany Christensen and Dr. Natalie Love, who was formerly with Cal Poly and is now with University of Illinois, Chicago, for all their economic and urban forest expertise, as well as their insights and wisdom in leading this project. Lastly, I would also like to recognize Megan Duquette. Megan has been amazing at making sure that we stayed on track. She has been innovative and persistent in seeking greater survey feedback around the state. She even called on her expertise from working in the county to secure more local government surveys through some way that you can ping the government to get information. I forget what that's called, but so thank you so much, Megan. And as you know, she manages our webinars beautifully. And lastly, we'll be sending out PDFs of the final reports, which will cover the California as well as the regions in the state. We'll be sending those to you who have attended, and they'll also be available on our website as well. So thank you for being here. Take care. Back to you.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to switch our slide deck, and then we'll turn it over to our presenters today. And again, thank you so much for being here and joining us this morning. So we'll get that slideshow up in just a moment. Okay, I will now turn it over to our research team. You have the floor.
All right, thank you very much, Megan. Thank you, Cindy, for the background information. Megan, thank you for the housekeeping and agreeing to handle the slides for us today. My name is Eric Wiseman. I'm a professor of Urban and Community Forestry at Virginia Tech. It's kind of odd that you have folks on the East Coast doing a study on the West Coast, and you may not have much reference for where Virginia Tech is. We're about 3 hours west of Richmond, and then Rajan at North Carolina State University is down in Raleigh, North Carolina, about 3 hours southeast of where I'm located. So Rajan, myself, and then Brittany Christensen, who worked on her Master's of Forestry degree for this study and continues to be a research associate with me at Virginia Tech. We will be your 3 presenters today. So I'll be starting the presentation. I'll then hand it over to Brittany, and then finally Rajan will conclude, and then I'll step back in with a few concluding remarks. Next slide, please, Megan. So not everyone who was on the project, little touchy there. Thank you, Megan. Not everyone who was on the project team is here today involved in the presentation. I'd like to also acknowledge Sheila Pokral, who was a graduate research assistant with Dr. Rajan Parajuli at North Carolina State University. Sheila likewise worked on this project in fulfillment of her master's degree at NC State. And then, as Cindy mentioned previously, we did have some West Coast assistance from Dr. Natalie Love when she was at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, now at Chicago Botanic Garden. And of course, Sydney Blaine and Megan Duquette were very instrumental in getting this project completed. Next slide, please. As we get started, I do want to provide some additional acknowledgements. Cindy mentioned earlier that this study was funded by CAL FIRE. And I would like to likewise, again, thank Cindy and Megan for both giving us a lot of local context, but also keeping us research geeks grounded. We had a lot of really deep conversations, but they were always very instrumental in bringing it back to a practical reality and helping us fulfill the expectations of the study. Likewise, want to thank the Urban and Community Forestry stakeholders who offered input and suggestions for our study, as well as industry sector representatives who tested our survey instrument during its developmental phase. And then finally, we had some urban and community forestry partners throughout the state of California who assisted us with outreach for our survey, and then those who actually responded to our survey. Thank you all very much. Next slide, please, Megan. So I want to provide a real brief outline of our presentation for today. As I mentioned, the 3 of us will be giving the presentation. I'm going to be talking to you all about the background on the project, specifically looking at the scope of the project and the population that we studied. I'll then hand it off to Brittany, and she will provide you some information about the survey methods and then our survey results. And then Rajan will finally take a deeper dive into using that survey data for the economic contribution analysis. Next slide, please. So an enduring question that we have in urban and community forestry is how do we promote stewardship of urban and community forests? There's a lot of different ways that we have, and we could do this. Of course, there's a long history of doing ecological research to demonstrate the understanding of the biology and ecology and the ecosystem services of the urban forest. Increasingly important for reaching out with this scientific research is storytelling and testimonials. But what our study really intends to fill a gap in is in socioeconomic research. This is an emerging area of research in urban and community forestry, and it's critical for making these linkages between people and the value that urban and community forests provide in our lives. Next slide, please. As Cindy mentioned earlier, myself and Rajan and some other collaborators had two previous experiences with conducting similar studies in the United States. Rajan, first of all, led a team in the Northeastern and Midwestern states, 20 states in total, that was looking at the economic impact in the year 2018. And then we moved to the 13 Southern state region in 2019. And then we joined Cal, ReLeaf, and Cal Fire in doing the California study for the reporting year 2021. Next slide, please. So a really critical element of this study that was both a challenge and an interesting endeavor was how to exactly define and frame urban and community forestry. Most of us on the call know it can sometimes be difficult to settle on a clear and concise definition of the profession and who are involved in it. Through much discussion and vetting, we came up with the statement that you see here on the slide, which was presented to those who were opting into our survey. And I'll read this for you real quickly. We defined urban and community forestry for our study as all activities that support or care for trees in cities, towns, suburbs, and other developed areas, including producing trees, planting trees, maintaining trees, and removing trees. Next slide, please. And in particular with the private green industry, we had to especially develop some clearer understanding of who all is involved in the private sector. And especially the reason for this was how Rajan undertook the economic input-output modeling. And so this relies upon an industry classification system in the United States called NAICS, North American Industry Classification System. And you can see there under item 1 in the table on the right, these are the private green industry classifications that we included in our scope of organizations and entities that we were distributing our survey to. So there are 6 of those. But we also distributed our survey to number 2, private investor-owned and cooperative utility companies. Number 3, public agencies, including cities, towns and counties, and state agencies involved in urban and community forestry. Number 4, higher education institutions to the extent that they are managing their campus urban forests. And then number 5, nonprofit organizations. More to come on that from Rajan later. Next slide, please. I want to pause for a moment and talk a little bit more in detail about the landscape services industry, this NAICS 561730, because a lot of conversation was held on where do we constrain this, or how do we constrain it? How far do we go out on the periphery of this very large industry cluster in delineating what we thought could be rightfully included as urban and community forestry activities and what to exclude? And so what I've done in these bullet points here is to pull some of the statements describing these various industry classifications and highlight some keywords that we honed in on when we were including these industry clusters. So for example, bullet point number 2 there is talking about engaging in providing landscape care and maintenance services, including the installation of trees. Bullet point there number 3 about designing landscape plans and or their construction. So we were trying to pull in landscape architects who felt like they were contributing to urban and community forestry. And then the final bullet point there is a catch-all for arborist services. And you can see that this is a very broad view of arborist services, including right-of-way maintenance, either street road right-of-ways or utility right-of-ways, the maintenance of ornamental trees, plants, and shrubs, tree and brush trimming, specifically in overhead utility line easements, and then finally, general tree care services. Next slide, please. And the final thing that I'll provide with you all for the project background is just to give an overview of the process of conducting our study. Of course, the first thing that we led with was determining what were the objectives of the study. And you're going to hear today that we had some objectives that related specifically to the economic contribution modeling, but we also wanted to add value to this survey and be able to understand a little bit more about this industry as well as the organizations participating in it. So Brittany's going to talk to us a little bit about some perceptions of COVID-19 impacts on urban and community forestry activities, as well as perceptions of challenges and future outlook. We just finished talking a little bit about our study population, but delineating that population and then figuring out how to make contact with them to distribute our survey was another important step. And Brittany will talk about our recruitment and outreach methods in a moment. We then went through a very iterative process in designing our survey. Of course, we had the benefit of having a survey instrument from two prior instances of the study in the Northeast and the Southern states. And then we went on to the survey administration. Brittany will talk to us a little bit about the outreach effort that was involved there. And then finally, once we had that survey data in hand, the analysis and the conclusions that were drawn. So this will bring my first part to a conclusion, and I'll now hand it over to Brittany.
Thank you, Eric, for that wonderful overview of the project. Hello, everyone. I'm Brittany. As Eric mentioned, I worked on this study for my master's thesis, which I completed in December of last year. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about the survey methods and the trends that we observed among the respondents in the sectors. Next slide, please. So we created this survey instrument through the online survey platform called Qualtrics, and the questions were vetted by a steering committee with representation from each of our target sectors, which Eric just went over. The survey campaign evolved into 3 rounds instead of the typical 1 because we wanted to gather a larger and more representative sample size for each of the sectors. That's why you see survey rounds 1, 2, and 3 as separate columns in the table. And we'll start here with our outreach methods. We used a convenient sampling approach, which basically means we did not purposefully and randomly select test subjects, but rather they volunteered to be part of the sample. And the table here shows the number of people we reached using each outreach method. These estimates of audience reach reflect how many people either viewed our social media posts or received our survey invitations directly. The bottom line shows the number of survey responses we gathered during the survey round. And above that line is the total number of people that we reached during the survey round. Be mindful that same people may be double counted across different outreach methods and survey rounds. Starting with round 1, which began September through December 2022. To reach all of the sectors, we posted our advertisement on the California ReLeaf social media through 6 outlets, and that is the number that you see in parentheses. And these outlets included Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And this method reached an audience of about 9,000 people. We also purchased advertisements in 10 newsletters of urban forestry organizations in California, and that reached about 12,000 people. And thirdly, some members of our steering committee helped share our survey invitation through their email list, which reached about 7,000 people. These 3 methods were intended to reach a wide audience that fell within each of our target sectors, but we had to anticipate a low number of responses from the private sector, given the team's experience on other regional impact studies. So we used 2 additional strategies to target the private sector. First, we purchased private sector email lists through SICK-Code, which had the NAC codes that Eric mentioned. Those had over 3,000 emails. And secondly, we sent out 3,000 postcards to private contractors who were registered in California's Contractor State License Board. And that was the extent of round 1 outreach. At the end of it, we received 52 survey forms submitted through Qualtrics. We weren't satisfied with the 52 responses we received during round 1, so we launched another survey campaign, this time offering a $100 Amazon gift card to 25 randomly selected participants. During this survey round, we followed the same outreach methods as before, and we put additional effort into increasing responses from the public sector. To do this, we compiled a list of municipal contacts in Parks and Rec and Public Works in California, and we sent them individual survey invitation emails. Also, during the second round, we had a little bit extra help from California ReLeaf because they made some phone calls to their network and promoted the survey during conference outreach. At the end of March, we received 133 completed and valid surveys, which brought us to 185. Still, we were lacking adequate representation from the public sector, so we launched round 3 as our final effort. And during round 3, we offered municipalities the additional option of completing a paper-based survey and mailing their responses to NC State. At the end of June, we received another 19 responses for a total of 204 across the 5 sectors. So that is an overview, a very long overview of our audience outreach methods. Next slide, please. So after all that survey outreach effort, this table shows you the breakdown of the number of surveys that were gathered within each sector across the 3 survey rounds. At the end of round 3, we felt like we had a usable sample size to begin analysis. You can see most responses came from the private business sector with 106, followed by public agencies, 46 responses, nonprofit organizations at 37, and we only received 8 and 7 responses from private utility companies and higher education institutions, which meant for me, I couldn't use these sectors for my analyses, but thankfully Rajan was able to gather the information he needed for his economic impact modeling through publicly available data and public records requests. Note the red asterisks next to survey round 2 at the bottom row, next to 133 responses. As I mentioned before, we included a $100 Amazon raffle incentive, which we soon realized resulted in around 2,000 fraudulent responses from suspected internet bots. I'll be brief when I say this was a lot of effort, but when I say internet bot, I mean a small computer program developed by people to search the internet for surveys with prizes and complete the surveys fraudulently over and over for a chance to win the prize. So the number you see here is the total number of valid survey responses after all the responses went through a very extensive data cleaning process. And I created this filtering process based on peer-reviewed literature, which recommended removing responses with duplicate IP addresses, duplicate emails, coordinates outside the United States, unusually short duration responses, and suspicious free responses and emails. Despite the temporary setback, we ended with a good sample size that we felt confident in our analyses. Next slide, please. So in these next few slides, you'll see some results I presented in my degree paper. I focused on characterizing the survey respondents and comparing their perceptions of industry challenges. Here, I focused on private businesses, public agencies, and nonprofit organizations as the 3 sectors, since these were the ones with adequate sample sizes. First thing I'd like to describe is the characteristics of the respondents, so you can get a sense of who was responding to the survey. I'll focus on this slide on the private sector since it has a wide range of business activities and it comprised over half of our respondents. We found that the 50% of the private sector respondents were involved in landscape services, which can include arborist, consultants, and tree care businesses. The second and third most common business types were landscape architectural services with 17%, and nursery, greenhouse, and tree production with 16% of respondents in this business type. As far as demographics, 78% of our private sector respondents were male, 72% were white, and 70% had at least a bachelor's degree. Next slide. On this slide, we're continuing to analyze the survey respondents in the private green industry. The table here lists each business type in the private sector, And the second column lists the average number of employees in the business, and the third column shows the average percentage of employees in the business type that focus their work on urban and community forestry. The business type of landscape and tree care services has an average of 35.5% of their employees focusing on urban and community forestry efforts, which is the largest percentage compared to the other business types. Remember that urban and community forestry, as defined earlier, is all activities that support the care for trees in cities, towns, suburbs, and other developed areas. So it makes sense that this business type would have the largest percentage of employees focusing efforts on urban and community forestry. You might notice the category of farm and garden machinery wholesalers, which is the second from the bottom. It has a very large number of average employees per business, but this average was based on 4 respondents, so we assume there's a lot of variability there. While these numbers may not seem like much now, they are essential for modeling the economic contribution of these businesses to the urban and community forestry sector in California, which Rajan will get more into later. Next slide. So we just looked at the number of employees in the private sector, and now we're going to look at how volunteer hours are being utilized by the sectors. This figure shows the 3 sectors on the x-axis, and on the y-axis shows the percentage of respondents who reported their annual volunteer hours within one of the 5 ranges provided in the survey, which is shown in the legend. Within each sector, the percentages total to 100%. You can see that the private and the public sectors do not report as many annual volunteer hours as the nonprofit sector. The nonprofit sector reported the largest number of volunteer hours, with 40% of the sector reporting over 501 hours from volunteers over the entire year of 2021. The private sector reported 0 volunteer hours most frequently, and the public sector reported 1 to 50 hours most frequently, closely followed by 0 volunteer hours. Volunteer hours from the public sector are lower than would be expected, but a possible explanation for this could be partnerships between public agencies and nonprofit organizations when working on community forestry activities, which would mean that the nonprofits would report the volunteer hours rather than the public sector. Next slide. Another topic we were interested in learning about in our survey was understanding operational challenges faced by each of the sectors. So the next 3 slides will show the responses of 3 sectors to a similar set of questions about their operational challenges. We'll start here with the private sector, and we asked them the following question. Listed below are some potential challenges to organizations involved in urban and community forestry. Rate how significant each is for your business. Respondents were asked to evaluate this statement on a 5-point Likert scale, ranging from not at all challenging to extremely challenging for each of the challenges. For ease of visualizing the ratings, we've condensed the 5-point scale into a 3-point scale. The graph shows the percentage of respondents within the private sector who rated the operational challenge within one of the 3 perception categories. And those categories include extremely to very challenging in dark red, moderately to slightly challenging in orange, and not at all challenging in light tan. The private sector finds the cost of operations as a great challenge. Out of the 10 challenges provided in the list, 7 challenges were rated by over a third of the private sector as extremely or very challenging, and 3 of those were associated with the budget. Since private businesses work for profit, they have to pass these costs onto their customers while offering competitive prices. So the challenges associated with the cost of fuel, equipment, and insurance really have no easy solution. But we might be able to find creative solutions to some other challenges, like workforce shortage and a lack of qualified personnel, which were rated by over 40% of respondents as very or extremely challenging. To address this challenge, we would need a good apprenticeship program or training programs to make these skilled jobs more accessible to the emerging workforce. Improving customer awareness and quality services was another challenge that we could work towards collectively in the industry, which was also rated highly by respondents. And some methods might be education or community engagement. Next slide. So we just talked about the private sector, and now we're going to look at the nonprofit sector. We asked the nonprofit sector the same question, but with a unique list of operational challenges tailored to their sector. Similar to the private sector, the budget seems to be a major concern for the nonprofit sector, followed by a lack of coordination between departments, inadequate state or local regulations, and a lack of public awareness or cooperation. In the nonprofit sector, 5 of the 8 challenges were rated as extremely or very challenging by over a third of respondents. It seems that workforce shortage and a lack of qualified private sector contractors are not as challenging of issues since they're listed at the bottom of the list. It's different from what we just saw in the private sector, interestingly. One explanation may be that there's a higher demand for workers in the private sector because there are thousands of businesses looking to hire, whereas we estimated there are less than 100 nonprofit organizations in California that focus at least some efforts on urban and community forestry. So we can see those are low priority on the list, but we did find it interesting that lack of urban forest inventories and data was a concern to 3/4 of respondents. And it seems that with the advancement of remote inventory methods, we're making headway in this space, and hopefully this wouldn't be as big of a challenge in the future. Next slide. The public sector here seemed to rate less challenges as extremely or very challenging compared to the other sectors. Seen in the graph here, only 2 challenges were ranked as extremely or very challenging by around a third of respondents. The major challenges for public agencies are inadequate budget and a lack of public awareness or cooperation. Public agencies are also more likely to rank challenges as not at all challenging. As you can see, the bottom 5 challenges ranked by over a third of respondents is not at all challenging. Comparing among the sectors, the 3 that we just looked at, we see that all sectors experience a challenge with budget. Private businesses feel more challenges are extremely or very challenging, many of which are linked to the cost of operations and inadequate workforce. The nonprofit sector experiences challenges with coordination, regulations, and public awareness of services. And the public agencies feel the least strongly about the challenges, rating many as moderately to not at all challenging. Any one of these challenges will limit the extent of urban and community forestry in California, and any incremental efforts we as an industry can do to address these challenges will hopefully increase the prevalence of urban forestry for the good of the community and the environment. Next slide. So we just talked about challenges. Now we're going to look at another challenge that we were interested in learning about, which was the COVID-19 pandemic in California. Since our survey was first released in September 2022, we were curious to find out how the sectors felt about the pandemic's impact. We asked respondents the following question: how did the COVID-19 pandemic, such as lockdowns in March through June 2020, affect the urban and community forestry activities of your institution in 2020? The graph here shows the percentage of respondents within each sector who reported either a positive, neutral, or negative perception of the pandemic impact on their institution. The rating scale was condensed from 5-point to 3-point again for simplicity in the graph. Once again, we're comparing the 3 sectors, and the nonprofit sector had the largest percentage of respondents who reported a negative perception of the pandemic impact, with 85%. The public sector revealed 61% of respondents with a negative perception, and the private sector reported the least frequent of the sectors, with 49% reporting negative. It seems that COVID-19 positively impacted the private sector more than the other sectors, with almost a quarter of respondents reporting a positive impact. And I found that really interesting, that private sector respondents felt a positive effect from the pandemic, because we've seen publications over the past few years about how the pandemic encouraged more people to go outside and start gardening as a hobby. So I think that increased interest in nature that many communities experienced is reflected here in the private sector's respondents. Where there is an increased demand for their business, that might be a possible explanation. More people developed an appreciation for nature's benefits. Of course, this is all my interpretation of the data, but that's one conclusion you could draw from this. Another factor that likely affected each of the sectors differently was how they were able to continue operations despite the new COVID regulations. For example, in the private green industries, people in the green industries could continue working outdoors, but just maintaining social distance when interacting with clients and each other. But if you were more on the office side, the work of planning and administration, you had to move remotely, and the face-to-face community engagement aspect of nonprofit work likely came to a halt, at least for a while there. Next slide. And lastly, we asked respondents, given the COVID-19 pandemic, how would you describe the future outlook of your organization's urban and community forestry activities? Despite the negative perception of the pandemic impact, it seems that the majority of respondents had an optimistic outlook for the future of their organization. The nonprofit and public sectors were slightly more optimistic on average, with around 70% feeling optimistic, whereas a little over half of respondents in the private sector felt optimistic after the pandemic. That is interesting. It's interesting that in the previous question, private sector had more respondents reporting positive effects to the pandemic compared to the other sectors, yet they're the least optimistic of the sectors. One theory might be their pessimism is linked to uncertainties about how the economy was going to recover or how small businesses would be impacted after the pandemic. But still, overall, the majority of respondents felt optimistic about the future of urban and community forestry after the pandemic. With that, I'll hand it off to Rajan now to talk about the really interesting stuff, which is how much urban and community forestry is contributing to California's economy.
All right. Thank you, Brittany and Eric and Megan and Cindy. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for once again for your interest in our work and attending this webinar. Could you please move to the next slide, Megan? All right. So after the study and all the survey details like Brittany went over, let's switch gear and jump into the meat of the study, right, which is economic contribution metrics of urban and community forestry in California in 2021. The survey helped us to extract the urban and community forestry portion from the overall green industry, which I will show you in a minute. We utilize the implant software. I don't know how many of you are aware of that, and the data from 2021 to estimate the economic contribution numbers. Please note that I'm using the terminology economic contribution, not economic impact, for reasons, because in the input-output modeling, those are two different concepts. So since we are talking about the existing industries and organizations in 2021 in California, we need to call it economic contribution. But if it was about the new industry coming into the economy for the first time, like new mills, new school, a new landscaping farm, and we have to call that economic impact. Some people also use the word economic footprint these days, the supply chain impact, which should also be consistent with our economic contribution analysis. So in economic analysis or input-output modeling, the main concept is estimating indirect and induced effects from the direct effect. I'll define this terminology in next slide. The direct effects are just within the urban and community forestry itself, and the total effects, including indirect and induced effects, are in the entire economy. So the total effects are the number we need to pay attention when you talk about the overall economic effects or the size of the industry. Next slide, please. All right, so you can see now how we pretty much sum of the direct, indirect, and induced effects to come up with the total effect. So direct effects, I already explained, right? The expenditures of the initial production changes associated with an industry or sector in the study area, which are entered into the input-output analysis. So indirect effects are through the supply chains, basically the economic impact of local industries for purchasing goods and services from other related industries. And induced effects is mostly from the household spending of employee in food, housing, etc. For instance, let's consider a landscaping farm. Just want to So the example of direct, indirect, and induced effects. Let's take example of landscaping firm. Its day-to-day operation cost, salary and wages to its employees. Those are pretty much go to direct effect of the landscaping firm to their regional economy. Indirect effects, in another word, are like for a landscaping firm, they need to purchase trucks, gasoline, electricity, equipment to operate their business. In landscaping business, those are pretty much indirect effects because those are coming out of other related businesses. And similarly, the induced effects are like employees supported by the landscaping firms spend on food, grocery, or housing, rentals. Those housing spendings all are induced effects. So the total effects are the sum of all three, direct, indirect, and induced effects. In our study, we utilized our survey, the US Census Bureau, and the implant software to compile the annual direct effect in terms of employment in urban and community forestry in California. And then we employed the implant software to estimate indirect and induced effects based on the multipliers from the implant software. Also, all these numbers in detail in a few minutes. Next slide, please. All right, before jumping into the results, I want to introduce a few terminologies I'm going to utilize, at least refer to. And the first one is labor income. It's all about the salaries and wages and payroll, like employee compensations, and the proprietary and self-paying income as well. This is all about the labor income. And if we add taxes on production and imports as other property income, as well as the corporate profit to the labor income, we call it a value added, which is equivalent to gross domestic product, commonly referred to as GDP. And because we are talking about the state or regional, we call the gross regional product. And value added is all about the wealth created by the individual activities. So very important metrics in macroeconomics. And then if we add the intermediate inputs to value added, it is called economic output, the largest number in the economic contribution analysis. Basically, the output is the total value of production. The total value of production of any industry can be captured by the industry's total sales or total expenditures. By the rule of economics, value added is more appropriate and metrics as the outputs at times have double or multiple counting of the intermediate inputs through the supply chain. But the output is often used in the input-output analysis just to showcase the overall economic activities in the dollar terms through the supply chain. And similarly, the employment in input-output modeling is just a head counts. It's not FTEs. So that's why it's covering all full-time, part-time, and seasonal jobs, just counting heads. Next slide, please. All right, so how the survey information are used in our study, like Brittany already alluded to, the informations we collected through the survey of several sectors are really instrumental in our economic impact study. Specifically for the private industry, we utilize the survey data to extract the urban forestry portion from green industry because implant the NAICS pretty much lumped urban forestry within the green industry. But for public agencies, we use the survey data to estimate the number of employees per city and per county by different population size of their jurisdictions. And then we calculate the urban forestry portion accordingly. For instance, as an example, landscaping services in California in 2021 had 108,833 jobs. Our survey suggests that only 35.5% of total employees in landscaping services engaged in urban and community forestry, resulting in a total of 38,635 urban and community forestry jobs supported by landscaping services industry in California directly. So this is the approach we use, pretty much tweak, at least extract the urban forestry portion from the green industry. Next slide, please. All right, here are the lot of numbers, and you'll see more numbers in the remaining slides because I'm the number guy, right? So I would like to just provide you with a sense that how we utilize the U.S. Census Bureau or the implant numbers to estimate the direct effects, exact number of jobs in urban and community forestry related industries, and then we went to the implant later to impute other metrics like labor income, value added, and economic output and taxes. The column in the green box in the table has the number we obtained from our survey of private industries, and using those percentage urban forestry within the green industry of each sector, we extracted the urban and community forestry direct jobs from the overall green industry in California. So you can see on the table our estimates show in 2021 in California across the state, the private sector supported 49,253 jobs in urban and community forestry industries directly. The landscaping services, of course, had the largest share, about 80% of the total private sector jobs. Right, next slide, please. All right, similarly, in public agencies, specifically municipalities, cities, and county governments, we use our survey information again in the green box per city and per county, urban and community forestry jobs across the various population categories within their jurisdictions. The number of cities and counties by their population category were obtained from U.S. Census Bureau of Population Division in second and third column, and the number multiplied by the per city or per county to obtain the total direct urban and community forestry jobs. So we estimated about 1,715 urban and community forestry jobs related jobs in California in 2021, supported by cities and counties directly. Next slide, please. Similarly, we estimate the direct jobs in urban and community forestry supported by higher education institutions and the nonprofits. First, we estimated the number of urban and community forestry jobs supported by the institutions with various student enrollment categories. You see on the first table. And for nonprofits, we also use our survey to have an idea on their involvement in various urban and community forestry related activities and tie them up with the private industries. We estimated that in California in 2021, 469 direct jobs supported by higher ed, and about 438 urban and community forestry jobs supported by 115 nonprofits involved in urban and community forestry. Thank you. Next slide. All right, once again, once we set the direct employment profile, like I just showed, now is the time to go to implant and input-output modeling software to estimate the multiplier effects. So we use the direct employment number into the implant and use the built-in industry contribution analysis tool within the implant cloud-based system to estimate the indirect and induced value of employment, labor income, industry output, value added, and taxes. We followed our peer-reviewed approach methodology like Eric already showed from Southern study and Northern study closely to conduct the economic contribution analysis. Next slide, please. All right, more numbers, but these are important. Okay, important numbers to your interest, maybe. Sorry, I have a lot of tables, but we have a full report like Citi already mentioned, explaining all these numbers. If you'd like to go over these again in detail, this table just shows the direct effects. Again, that we created the employment profile from the survey and implant and the U.S. Census Bureau, and the implant inputted based on the employment profile, the other economic metrics like labor income, value added, and the industry output. I'll show you the tax contribution separately later. So our results suggest in California in 2021, urban and community forestry directly supported over 52,000 jobs, full-time and part-time jobs, with a labor income of about $3 billion in 2021 dollars, and the value added, that is GDP, of over 4 billion, and the total economic output of about $7 billion. The private sector is the largest one, as expected, about 95% of effects, followed by the municipal governments, higher ed, nonprofits, counties, investor-owned and corporate utilities, and state agencies like California Department of Transportation, CAL FIRE, and other state agencies. Next slide, please. All right, here is the total effect. The previous table was just the direct effect, and this is the total economic contribution. These are the numbers to be used just to measure the size of the economy, the size of the urban and community forestry in California. So that's aggregate of direct, indirect, and induced. We have all this in detail in our full-blown report again. So with every effect summed up, urban and community forestry in California in 2021 supported over 78,560 jobs with an economic output of $12.9 billion and value added of $7.6 billion, along with the labor income of $5.1 billion. These are the main numbers which we should pay attention to when you talk about the overall economic contribution of urban and community forestry. Next slide, please. So you may wonder that how California pretty much stands comparing with the other states. I just picked the two examples, Texas and Florida. I know New York is also big, but these are in the different years. But just want to show the comparing with the other states where California stands. California has about 10,000 less jobs compared to Florida. I know these are in the different years, but at least just to put in the perspective, but more than $2.5 billion economic output. I know that Florida was in 2019, California is 2021, but it's still, but the Texas is even smaller compared to California. But it shows that the California, in terms of dollar values, the largest state in terms of the size of urban and community forestry, along with the many other things, California always leads across the nation, right? All right, next slide, please. Quickly about the tax contribution. Again, everything detailed in the report, but urban and community forestry in California in 2021 had about $1.1 billion in 2021 dollars directly contributed in the different types of taxes, and almost $2 billion to total tax contributions, where about the half was the federal tax collections from urban and community forestry, and another 1/4 state taxes, and the rest were county, sub-county, like city, school district taxes as well. Next slide, please. All right, before wrapping it up, I want to at least go look at the how our numbers pair with the previous studies in California. Like Cindy mentioned, in the past, someone did in 1993 and 2009, and even Arbor Day Foundations conducted a nationwide study in 2017. Please note that our study cannot be compared with previous one, like apple to apple, as these studies varied by various economic impact analysis approaches. The scope of urban and community forestry included. Note that our one is most exhaustive. We try to incorporate most of the industries related to urban and community forestry, and more importantly, different timing, right? And the dollar values reported in this table are not the inflation adjusted. I did that $3.38 in 1993 is $1993. So our number 7.6 billion is from 2021. They are different years. Previous studies like California 1993 and 2009 estimated about 53 and 59,000 total jobs with about $3.5 billion value added in compared to our study. Showed 78,560 jobs with 7.6 billion value added, which is in 2021 dollars. So Arbor Day Foundations also from a few years ago study, again similar but not apple to apple comparisons, reported about 65,514 jobs with 7.7 billion in 2017 dollars, which is to some extent comparable to our numbers. Another point I would like to highlight before wrapping my part is that 2021, like Brittany already showed, was not a normal year, right? We are on and off, kind of in the middle of the pandemic, and the numbers might be impacted by the COVID, as several sectors already reported varying impact of COVID-19 on the urban and community forestry activities, as Brittany already went over. All right, before I wrap, can you move to the another slide, please? I would just like to heads up, we have also conducted 6 region-specific analyses in California as well, and each region has a full-blown report using the similar methodology. And next slide, please. I want to just quickly show the quick total effects number from those 6 regions. I don't want to go in detail, but yeah, just would like to show the total effects. All the details will be again on each select region's report. Among these 6 regions, LA Orange supported about 19,200 jobs in 2021 with $2.9 billion industry output. That is out of that 78,000 jobs, followed by the Bay Area and Central Valley and Inland Empire. Again, you'll get to see these detailed results for each regions in the full region reports. With this, I would like to hand it over back to Eric for the concluding remarks. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions and comments at the end. If anyone has any interest in learning the methodology and see my specific sausage making process, I'm happy to set separate meeting up and show how I conducted the entire analysis in plan and some of other my number crunching approach. Thank you again. Please.
All right, thank you, Rajan, and thank you, Brittany, as well, for giving us a really nice overview of the data. Megan, we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to cover a couple of takeaways from the study, and the first thing that we want to focus on here is just reiterating the importance of these contribution data. First of all, one takeaway is that it highlights the economic significance of urban and community forestry in the regional economies of California. It also helps us to gauge the size and overall trends in private businesses and public agencies and their involvement in urban and community forestry. And then finally, is our hope that you and others will use our contribution data to seek additional support from economic development investments and policymakers and legislators in the state of California. Next slide, please. And then to summarize both Brittany's report as well as Rajan's here, first of all, recapping the operational challenges across the urban and community forestry sectors, we found that the nonprofit organizations reported perceptions of budgetary shortages as well as lack of public awareness as being major challenges for their work in urban community forestry, whereas the private sector reported workforce shortages as well as lack of qualified personnel. And then finally, the public sector was reporting perceptions of challenges from a lack of coordination between departments and inadequate state and local regulations. And then finally, in reflecting on the COVID-19 impacts on urban and community forestry operations, the nonprofit organizations had the strongest perception of negative impacts of COVID on their operations. The private sector had about half experiencing neutral to positive impacts, and then the public sector having a weaker perception overall of negative impacts. And then looking at the outlook post-pandemic, it was overall amongst the 3 industry sectors between neutral and positive. Next slide, please. And then summarizing the economic contribution of urban and community forestry in California, we saw that it contributed substantially to the regional economy in 2021. Total jobs about 78,560, total value added 7.6 billion, adding in the labor income 5.1 billion, total economic output $12.9 billion. And finally, the private sector contributed approximately 90% of that total economic output and employment support of urban and community forestry in California. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the conclusion of the formal part of our presentation. We'll now conclude and open for question and answer, and we'll allow Megan to moderate that. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you to all of our presenters today. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and if you do have a question, feel free to use the chat feature. And if you'd rather use the raise your hand feature on the Zoom toolbar, you can do that now, and then we'll call on you and we'll ask you to unmute yourself. So let's start with the questions in the chat. The first was, let's see here. Did the survey go out in Spanish? That's the first question.
Eric, are you gonna take that, right?
Yeah, sure. And then Brittany can also help me as well
Yeah.
as Megan, especially as it relates to some of our outreach, as well as the survey instrument itself. We did take into consideration the bilingual consideration, with Spanish being the predominant second language. I believe, Rajan, that the survey was available in Spanish. We didn't print it in Spanish, correct? But people could
No.
request it.
Yeah,
They could request it in Spanish. And then Megan and Brittany, were any of our outreach in Spanish?
I can say that our social media posts were not in Spanish. They were primarily in English. We did have certain community partners and stakeholders that put out the survey, and I would have to go back and look to find out if any of those efforts were translated in Spanish as part of our partners' outreach. I think we can go to the next question unless anybody else has anything to add. So the next questions were unlicensed providers such as landscape services, mow and blow, and tree trimmers included in the survey population?
I think perhaps Brittany and I could tackle that question. Brittany had mentioned previously in describing our survey administration was that it was a convenient sample, meaning that we didn't purposefully select people to respond, nor did we purposefully exclude anyone. However, we were targeting the study population by our choices of outreach mechanisms, trying to make sure that we were connecting specifically with those who we thought we wanted to include their data. And then Brittany could also comment on how we had when we sent out the emails, we purchased the email list that was generated from the business directory for the state of California. Is that correct, Brittany?
Yes. So the postcards that we sent out, we compiled a list of about 12,000 contacts from California's state contractors licensing board. So that specifically was targeting contractors in California, but I would say every other method was pretty broad. So people were allowed to complete the survey, whether they were a contractor or not.
On top of that, we purchased some contact information from a private company, right? So, and we don't exactly know that company has included the unlicensed providers. That's a kind of black box.
Correct. Thank you for the question.
Yep.
Okay, our next question is, can we get a copy of the report and the regional reports? And I think Cindy mentioned earlier that we will be finalizing those and having those available. Cindy, do you want to add anything, or Eric or Rajan there?
Yep.
No, we're just in the very final processes of checking them, and we'll be sending them out this week. We wanted to present the results and then be able to send it out to this group of people. So that's how we'll be doing it.
And then those will be housed where? They will be housed on
our website.
Webpage, right? Okay, all right.
On our website. And just remember, if you ever come to our website, there's a Google search box in the upper right-hand corner. You just have to put an economic study and you can find it anywhere on our website.
Yeah, when we will also mail it via our e-newsletter in just a moment. I'll put those links in the chat for everyone. Our next question was, they noticed that the private sector inputs were well represented in the research. Wondering if there could be a way to differentiate between public realm and private property improvements, forestry activity. As a CBO, almost all of the work we perform is in public rights of way or shared community facilities. So I don't know if Eric or Rajan, if you have any comments
Yeah.
or thoughts.
My recollection, and Brittany or Rajan could correct me, what we were presenting today were just a few of the elements of the survey questions, but I do not recall that we asked the respondents to differentiate where they did their work. Maybe Brittany might have a recollection, and therefore I don't think that we would have a mechanism existing in the data set to differentiate whether the work is being performed in the public or private property ownerships.
I do remember there was a question about, do you conduct work on golf courses or tribal lands? I think there was a few others in there. I don't know if it differentiated. That.
No, yeah, we didn't. We specifically asked even the public agencies, right? So all the private agencies, their involvement only. I don't think other than that, that golf and some of the school districts, we added that question, but we didn't get a lot of responses on that. I don't think we have any information to distinguish private and public properties. Sorry, maybe this is a good idea for the next round. Right?
Yeah, there you go.
In the future. Thank you so much, John.
Okay, our next question. Is there a way to post the other California studies that you mentioned in the previous years? That would be like the Arbor Day study, for instance.
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, we can. And Arbor Day should have that on their webpage because it was a nationwide. I don't know who did that for them. Maybe University of Nebraska. I forgot. Somebody did for them. And they have a nationwide, and then every state, all 50 states report. This should be posted on that. But we could definitely add that, Cindy, right? At least from 1993 and 2009.
Yes, absolutely. Good idea.
Okay, we got another question in the chat. Interested in any data on future sector growth of projections and recommended investment opportunities to meet those growth opportunities given external drivers like climate demands. Do you have any sense of projections of growth or thoughts on that?
Eric, would you like to take a first crack and then can jump in?
I don't have anything to add to that, Rajan. I'll give you a shot at it.
Okay.
I think
I mean,
the limited inference that we
yes,
had from this
yes.
survey specifically was asking the outlook, and that was a perception type question.
Yep.
Whether or not Rajan could use any of the data for projection, I don't know.
No, I didn't. That was about to I said, like we had that question specifically their perceived outlook, right? Given the pandemic, we're just coming out of the pandemic. But this is a really good question. But we had in the survey, we had another section we didn't cover here about the climate change impact, how different businesses and public agencies involved into the carbon markets or California climate investment funding. We have done the separate analysis and we haven't included that, but anybody is interested to look at that, we're happy to share, and we already developed the manuscript out of it, and that is currently under review with the Journal of Forestry. But anybody interested to look at that, we can send the manuscript to Cindy, and maybe Cindy and Megan can share with others, right? So, but that doesn't have a much of the projections and the direction, but at least looking at the how different sectors of the urban and community forestry are interested and how they are perceiving the climate change impacts and how they are pretty much interested in participating in carbon markets or climate investment funding in California.
You're muted, Megan.
Sorry about that. Our next question is, did the survey go out to urban planners?
My immediate recollection is no, but we could thumb back if we wanted to one of the early slides to look at that delineation of the 6 sectors and what was included specifically in that private sector. Yeah. That's where we were getting out on the periphery when we were having these conversations and subject matter expert inputs about where do we stop the delimitation of the urban and community forestry. industries. And that was getting out on the periphery where we're making the cut line. Rajan, do you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, I think we covered to some extent. For example, there is a specific next sector like 541320, which is landscape architectural services. And I think to some extent, I don't know, we have in our survey contact list any urban planners, but that specific next classification has some urban planning part as well. So, but to be honest, I don't exactly don't know whether we have included in the survey or not.
Well, that's a good point that Rajan makes, is that it was a convenient sample. If someone directly or indirectly encountered our recruitment for the survey and they felt like they should opt in based on the scope of their professional work, based on that definition that we provided, then they could have submitted a survey response. And therefore, there might be urban planners that were in the sample.
Great. Is there anyone out there that would like to ask a question verbally? You can use the raise your hand feature or just turn your camera on and put your hand up. You could do it that way. And I see Nancy, you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I did unmute. The question I had was sample size in community. Is it identified by numbers of people and population in your select group? If it was and I missed it, I'm sorry. We're a tiny town, so that's why I wondered. And you know, as an unincorporated community, we often are the last on the list to be understood in terms of our own effort. So I just wondered whether population size was figured into it when you reached out in your survey. Thank you.
Eric or Brittany?
Well, I think that Rajan, you had presented how you had demarcated, delineated some of your input-output modeling based on population size. But Nancy, my reply to you would be that to the extent possible, we were trying to reach to all communities, small, medium, and large, through our outreach and marketing efforts. Megan helped us in compiling contact lists, and ultimately who we were often trying to contact was a point of authority within a given jurisdiction who had responsibilities on behalf of the municipality for urban and community forestry. But we didn't try to control for, in our sampling scheme, the size of any given locality.
And then when we did that economic contribution analysis, we attempted to include all the different jurisdictions, at least the size of 5,000. We obtained those data from the U.S. Census Bureau. So our attempt was at least to incorporate all of them with at least a 5,000 populations within their jurisdictions.
Okay, great. We'll take Sarah Davis, if you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question, and we'll go to the question in the chat. So, Sarah.
Yeah, I think, hi, Sarah Davis from the city of San Jose. I think Kate Riley and I were thinking the same thing at the same time. It would be very helpful if we could see a list of respondents and their population size. I feel like I answered this survey when I was in Carmel, which is 1 square mile, but I'm not sure if my new community in San Jose, which is 180 square miles, responded to the survey. And I think that the responses by population size would be very helpful. The study that Rich Howard does every 10 years out of Wisconsin. It's a little bit frustrating because you can't get the individual communities spelled out. You just have this big aggregate. Is your publication going to de-aggregate some of the data?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Unfortunately, I would say no, because we just focus on the select regions, but definitely the question Kate and you have is, it can be done. It can be done. That has a different focus. These days, the implant has a data by zip codes, or even by MSAs. Definitely, my guess is the San Jose or Sacramento, those kind of MSA level model is already prepared, and it could be done. But unfortunately, we cannot do here in this project because we already lost the implant license because we just subscribed their data for 1 year, and that 1 year is already over. So I don't have a access to the implant model anymore.
Yeah.
But that can be done. If you have idea, we can explore the ways to do beyond this project if there is a lot of interest. I think I can definitely do at city level analysis.
And Sarah, I would add, I appreciate your question and understand your frustration. One thing to keep in mind with studies like ours, as well as Dr. Rich Hauer's municipal forestry census, is that we are beholden to very stringent confidentiality requirements by our respective institutional review boards. And we would never be able to divulge, even for a municipality, the data that we collected because of the requirements that are required for our conduct of research. What I would suggest doing is if, for example, your municipality or another municipality was interested in an economic contribution analysis specifically for your locality, would be to contact Rajan and see if that would be a possibility under a future agreement or partnership. However, maybe Rajan, it might be permissible, at least with the municipalities, as an appendix in the final report, to list those municipalities that were in the sample for that portion of the study. Whether or not that would be permissible, I don't know, but there would be maybe perhaps a degree of anonymity there that might be permissible.
Yeah.
But thank you, Sarah.
It's a good idea. Yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Well, I guess my next question is, if CAL FIRE funded this work in any way, shape, or form, they ask that the data be made public. For a tree inventory, they require that those be published, so anyone can see it, regardless of the amount of risk that a municipality is opening themselves up to. So I just wonder if this is different. I don't have an answer. I'm not leading the question. I'm just trying to find out.
Okay.
That would be a question for Rajan and his North Carolina State University compliance. It's very heavily regulated. Understand what you're saying, Sarah, regardless of who may have paid for the study.
Yeah, it is under the IRB, and we already signed the contract with the university that will not disclose any information at the individual level. So I don't know how to respond to that, but survey data, like Eric mentioned, it's very difficult, right? So we are binded by the university and the IRB guidelines.
Well, I think the next, go ahead, Cindy.
Just as a follow-up, I guess you're talking about having Rajan disclose expenditures by a city or that sort of thing. If there's public disclosure necessary in a city, can't just anybody in the city ask the city for that data?
Yeah.
If it's a public record, then yes, a municipality would need to be able to respond. And from my understanding, any citizen can ask for that. If that record exists, they can submit a public records request. And then I think in the chat, the question was kind of similar to what Sarah had mentioned. So I think that question is answered. But if the person who posed it has a follow-up question, they're welcome to raise their hand and ask away. Is there anyone else that has a question that they'd like to ask verbally or in the chat? Please let us know, and we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Kate.
Well, I am not seeing, maybe there's another question perhaps. Oh, someone thanking you for the presentation.
Thank you,
Um,
Nancy.
We are so pleased that everyone came to join us today. In just a moment, I'm going to put some links in the chat for all of you. And it looks like we've got a follow-up question in just a second. But I wanted to just point you to the chat right now. There's a link to California ReLeaf's website. If you're interested in learning about our network members who are all across the state, from as north as Eureka to as far south as San Diego, you can check out our network members, as well as find out about our funding opportunities and joining our email list, because we will be sharing the reports that were mentioned during this webinar via our newsletter, as well as with all of you that are registered today. So I'm going to let Sarah, if you've got a follow-up question, you can unmute yourself, and then we will do our best in answering your question.
Yeah, I'm that annoying person in class who asks too many questions. So I'm wondering, Walter, do you have any initial thoughts or reactions to the outcome? I have to disclose I'm a member of the California Urban and Community Forestry Advisory Council, so this is very interesting. So Walter, do you have any thoughts or reactions? Or maybe he hung up.
I don't see him on the line.
Oh, he was here before. Oh,
Oh, okay.
Cindy, do you have any thoughts or reactions?
I would say this is the first time I've ever been involved in an economic analysis, and we were very much trying to align it with what was happening in the rest of the country. So that was the parameters we had in mind. I think the question that had been brought up are all really interesting.
Yep.
But I would also say this is one of those areas where you can want to drill down to a real serious level of detail, but we're also really trying to see the broad scopes. You know, if you say to yourself, why do we do this study? In some ways, I feel like it's urban forestry trying to validate their existence. You know,
Yep.
this is what we bring besides the shade and all the benefits that we talk about as far as the human health in the community. We also bring these benefits to the economy. And we provide other types of jobs for people versus just working behind a desk, you know, type of thing. So I think this is successful in what we set out to do. But, you know, we love research. There's always different research projects that can happen. And that is something that if it needs to happen, it could be brought up at CUFAC, the California Urban and Forest Advisory Committee, or you can just call us up, and there's lots of researchers around California, fortunately, in urban forestry, and they're always looking for interesting projects. Hey, and we can go back east too, you know, type of thing.
Yep. No, I agree.
So I hope that helps. And this is, like we said, this is not, we've been doing this since 1993, right? Where we do these studies. So it is potentially time to say, okay, what do we want to do in 10 years? Or less, slightly less. But I'm just really pleased that all of you attended this and all of you are so interested in these results. This is fantastic. If you have more questions that come up over time, you know that you can always reach out to us at California ReLeaf. You've got our cell phone numbers, you've got our emails. So don't hesitate.
Yeah, Kate has a really interesting comment. Very interested in additionally knowing the value of the urban forest itself. Yeah, that's a really good point. We didn't cover that, but in our northern project, there was another component. I know I didn't lead that. I was just being an economist. I just did the economics part, but we had the another component looking at that, valuing ecosystem services using the iTree. That can also be done and come up with the value. Just okay, here are the economic metrics, right? But on top of that, urban forest has more than just those values. That could also be another area avenue, definitely.
Yeah,
So
and actually, that's something that gets brought up because of iTree. You know, the value of the urban forest has been discussed for a long time. And a lot of times it's well based on if the tree lives X amount of years too. So that is in some cases hypothetical. But we were interested in what were the jobs and the people involved bringing to the economy at this point.
Yeah. Kate, there's a robust literature on valuation of urban forest ecosystem services, as well as the structural compensatory value. And your very own Dr. Greg McPherson pioneered much of that research throughout the 1990s and 2000s. And I'll echo what Cindy says, not to diminish the importance of that economic valuation of the resource, but as someone who's been working in urban forestry for 30 years now, and being a researcher, I really see our future opportunity with this socioeconomic research. I think it's very value added, and I'm excited to have been a part of this project because I do think it's going to lead to additional information to guide the stewardship of urban forests. Thank you for the comment.
I want to add one other thing, and that was when we first got all the money for Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and we were planting trees, and we were planting trees specifically in underserved communities because of other legislation happening in California. People from underserved communities said, trees are great, but we need jobs, right? So that was another part of our inspiration, I guess you could say, to talk about, well, how can we, and there are all sorts of projects going on now that are for apprenticeships, et cetera. We have a lot of those going on within the urban forest nonprofits as well as in the urban forest for-profits. But how do we make sure people have employment and that there are jobs available, which this shows in the private industry specifically, especially.
Well, we are coming to our final minutes of the webinar. I just want to reiterate my thanks to all of our presenters today, our entire research team, for the amount of time and work they put into this and for sharing that with everyone today. Fantastic presentation. And I'm so glad that all of you were interested in learning more about the study. So does anybody have any final words from our presenters that they would like to share before we close today?
I'll say, go be disciples. Take this information to your communities, to your decision makers, agents of influence and change, and add this to the compendium of research-based information we have about the value of urban forests and urban forestry. And it's been a pleasure for me to get to know California ReLeaf team, but also get acquainted with urban and community forestry on the West Coast. So I wish you all very well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much for your interest. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. And you'll be hearing from me soon with a link to this recording as well as additional information. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your Monday. Take good care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.